She had spent 31 years building the kind of life that people say takes a lifetime, and she lost it in one night. Not slowly, not in pieces. In one night, the kind that smells like smoke and screams like sirens and looks like a sky turned orange at 2 in the morning, when you are standing barefoot on a sidewalk, watching everything you owned burn behind glass you cannot break. Her name was Adeze Okafor. Everyone who loved her called her Ada. And in the weeks that followed that night, she would learn that the distance between who you think you are and who you actually are is measured not in years or accomplishments, but in a single dark doorstep. And whether or not you have the courage to knock, stay with me, because this story is not about what she lost. It is about what she found in the rubble of it, and one of those things was a door she never expected anyone to open. Before you go any further, if you have ever felt like the ground disappeared beneath your feet without warning, like everything you built meant nothing to a world that kept moving without looking back at you, this story was written for you. Subscribe to this channel and stay until the very end, because what happens in the final hour of Ada's story is the part that will change how you think about survival. Now let us go back to the beginning, or rather to the middle of the night where the beginning ended. Ada had worked as a senior logistics coordinator for a mid-sized import company in Milan for 9 years. She was the kind of employee that managers quietly depended on and publicly underestimated. She knew the difference. She had always known the difference. She was a black Nigerian woman in a city that considered itself cosmopolitan, but still sometimes looked at her like she was a guest who had overstayed without being asked. She had learned to wear her competence quietly, to let the results speak in the language of spreadsheets and shipment records and deadlines, met without anyone having to ask twice. She lived in a rented apartment on the 3rd floor of an older building in the Navigli district. Not glamorous, but hers. She had a kitchen with a window that caught afternoon light, a bookshelf organized by color and emotion, a small balcony where she grew herbs in clay pots, and a savings account she'd been feeding carefully for 4 years with the intention of eventually buying something she could call her own. She had a cat named Benin, a grey and white creature of enormous dignity and very little patience. She had a sister back in Lagos named Neka, who called every Sunday morning without fail. She had a routine that gave her life the texture of something solid, something earned. She had, in other words, everything that people mean when they say everything. And then she didn't. The fire investigators later determined that the blaze originated in a shared electrical panel on the 2nd floor. An old system, badly maintained, reported twice to the building management company over a period of 18 months with no corrective action taken. The entire building suffered. 3 apartments were destroyed completely. Ada's was one of them. She escaped with her phone, her keys, the jacket she had thrown over her pajamas, and Benin in his carrier, because Ada was the kind of woman who, even in a state of smoke-induced panic at 2:15 in the morning, remembered the cat. She stood on the sidewalk and watched the orange sky. She did not cry. Not yet. The part of the brain that processes grief is sometimes the last part to arrive at a disaster. The first parts to arrive are the ones that count and calculate. She counted what she had. She calculated what came next. Her phone had 42% battery. Her savings account was real, but it was held in a bank that would not open for 6 more hours. She had no ID. Her passport, her residency documentation, her work contract, the folder she kept with every important paper she had ever produced in Italy, all of it was somewhere inside a building that was still smoldering. Neka would be asleep. The time in Lagos was 1 hour behind. She did not call. She sat on the low concrete barrier at the edge of the sidewalk, with Benin's carrier between her feet, and she watched the fire department work. Neighbors stood in small clusters, some crying, some on the phone, some holding children wrapped in blankets. A woman handed Ada a bottle of water without saying anything. Ada said thank you. The woman nodded and walked away. At some point, a representative from a city emergency services organization arrived and offered the displaced residents temporary shelter in a municipal facility 20 minutes away by van. Ada got in the van. She held Benin's carrier on her lap. She looked out the window the whole way and did not speak. The shelter was a converted community center. Clean enough, orderly, rows of cots separated by temporary dividers. Ada was assigned a space, given a hygiene kit and a blanket, and handed a form to fill out for emergency assistance. She filled it out carefully, with the same attention she brought to every form she had ever completed professionally. She listed everything she had lost. It took a long time. She did not sleep that night. At 6:45 in the morning, she called her bank. They told her that without her identity documents, accessing her account in person would require a specific process. They were helpful. They gave her a list of things she needed to do. She wrote the list down on the back of the emergency assistance form because she had no other paper. At 8 in the morning, she called her employer's main line. She was put through to the HR department. The person she spoke to, a man she had met perhaps 3 times in 9 years, was pleasant and expressed concern and told her that they would of course support her through this difficult time and that she should take whatever time she needed. He used the phrase, whatever time she needed, twice. He did not mention pay. He did not mention her contract. He did not mention the project she had been managing for the past 6 weeks, a complex cross-border shipment operation that was reaching its most critical phase. She thanked him. She hung up. She stared at the wall of the converted community center and understood, with the clarity that only arrives after a sleepless night and a sky full of smoke, that she was alone in a way she had never quite been before. Not because there was no one who cared. Necker would care enormously. Her friends, her church community, her colleagues, who were also genuinely decent people, they would all care. But caring and being able to do something are 2 different countries, and in this moment Ada was stranded at the border between them. She had no address. In Italy, an address is not just a place where you sleep. It is the foundation upon which your legal existence is constructed. Without an address, you cannot receive documents. Without documents, you cannot access your savings. Without savings, you cannot rent. Without a rental, you have no address. The circle closed around her like a fist. This is the part of the story that most people never talk about, not because it is too painful, but because it is too ordinary. Disasters are dramatic. The aftermath is just paperwork and silence, and the specific exhaustion of having to explain your situation to one more person who has a form for it. Hader spent 4 days in the shelter. She was not passive during those 4 days. She called the building management company and was told to direct her inquiries to their legal department. She filed a complaint with the Municipal Housing Authority. She contacted her consulate to begin the process of replacing her documents. She called the Italian Red Cross and was connected to a volunteer who walked her through what resources were available. She made lists. She followed up. She did everything correctly. But correctly in the immediate aftermath of losing everything is often not fast enough. On the 5th day, the shelter coordinator informed her gently that the facility was at capacity and that residents who had alternative options were being encouraged to transition out to make room for newly displaced families arriving from a flooding incident in the south of the city. Hader had €43 in the cash she'd had in her jacket pocket. Her emergency assistance application had been approved, but the funds would not be released for another 5 to 7 business days. She had one contact at her bank who had promised to escalate her case but had not yet called back. She had Benin, who was surviving on a brand of cat food the shelter had been stocking that he found offensive but was eating anyway. She sat with her phone and went through her contacts. She thought carefully about each name, not about who would help. Most of them would try. She thought about who could, practically speaking, accommodate her immediately, who had space, who had flexibility, who would not require her to perform gratitude in a way that would cost her something she could not afford to spend. The list was short, and then, one by one, it became shorter. Her closest friend in the city, Julia, was in the middle of hosting her mother-in-law and her sister simultaneously in a 2-bedroom apartment. Her colleague Priya had just had a baby 6 weeks earlier. There was a woman from her church, Beatrice, who had offered, genuinely warmly, but who lived 40 minutes from Ada's workplace on the opposite side of the city, and whose offer came with a specific energy of pity that Ada recognized and could not quite bear. She was not too proud to accept help, let that be clear. She was not the kind of woman who confuses dignity with self-destruction, but there is a difference between accepting help and accepting a version of yourself that someone else has already decided you are. The woman from church had already decided Ada was a victim, and Ada was not ready to confirm that. She was still thinking, still calculating. It was Benin who gave her the idea. Or rather, it was the memory of Benin. 3 months earlier, she had been asked by her company to coordinate a special delivery, an urgent private shipment of art materials and framing equipment for a client who had just relocated from Rome to Milan. The client had rearranged the pickup schedule twice at the last minute, which had required Ada to stay late on a Friday evening to ensure the transfer went smoothly. She had done it without complaint. The client had called the company's main line afterward to commend her by name, which almost never happened. Her manager had forwarded the email to her with a thumbs-up emoji and nothing else. The client's name was Marco Ferretti. She had never met him. She had spoken to him once on the phone to confirm the final delivery details. He had been polite, precise, a little formal. He had said at the end of that call, in a tone that suggested he meant it rather than merely said it, "Thank you, Miss Okafor. I am in your debt." She had written it off as the kind of thing that gracious people say. She found his name in her work email. She found a number. She sat for a long time looking at it. This is the part of survival that no one writes instruction manuals for, the moment when you have to decide whether your pride or your life takes precedence. It is not a small decision. It feels enormous, because it requires you to call someone you do not know well and say in some form or another, "I need you," and to not know what they will do with that. She called. He picked up on the third ring. His voice was exactly as she remembered, measured, unhurried. She said, "Mr. Ferretti, this is Ada Okafor. I coordinated your shipment 3 months ago. I apologize for calling this number directly. I am in an unusual situation, and I didn't know who else to—" He said, "Ms. Okafor, I know who you are. What happened?" She told him. Concisely. She gave him the facts in order. She did not dress them up, and she did not diminish them. She said she was looking for a short-term place to stay while her documents were processed, that she could pay as soon as her bank situation was resolved, that she had a cat, that she understood completely if the answer was no. There was a pause, not a long one. He said, "I have a studio apartment on the floor below mine that I use for storage. It has a proper kitchen and bathroom and heating. It needs some clearing out, but it is habitable. You can use it. There is no question of payment until you are back on your feet, and I have no objection to the cat." Ada sat very still for a moment. She said, "I want to be clear that I am asking for temporary shelter, not charity." He said, "I understand. Come this evening if you can. I will have the space ready." This is where most stories would pivot into something softer, something warmer, something that resolves too quickly into gratitude and connection and the neat emotional mathematics of rescued and rescuer. But Ada was not a woman who lived inside easy narratives, and Marco Ferretti, as she would discover, was not a man built for simple roles. She arrived that evening with Benin in his carrier, a borrowed bag of clothing from the shelter's donation station, her phone charger, and the list she had written on the back of the emergency assistance form. Marco met her at the street-level entrance of a building in the Brera district, older, solid, the kind of architecture that announces itself without apology. He was perhaps 50, with close-cropped grey hair and the posture of someone accustomed to being the tallest person in a room without trying. He was not warm in the way that performs warmth. He was something more useful than that. He was practical. He showed her the studio. It was what he had said. Storage space in transition but real. A proper bed frame. A kitchen with a functioning stove. A bathroom with good water pressure. He had cleared the main space, moved boxes to one side, changed the sheets. There was a bowl and a small tray on the floor near the window and for Benin that he had clearly acquired between her phone call and her arrival. She noticed the bowl. She said nothing about it. He showed her how the heating system worked, where the nearest grocery was, what time the building's main entrance locked automatically. He said she was welcome to come upstairs if she needed anything, but that he worked from home and kept irregular hours, and she should feel no obligation to interact with him, beyond what was useful to her. He said this last part carefully, like a man who had thought about how it might feel to be in her position, and had decided the most respectful thing he could offer was space. She thanked him. He nodded. He went upstairs. Ada stood in the middle of the studio and let herself feel, for the first time since the night of the fire, the full weight of what had happened, not the logistics of it, the human weight of it. She sat on the edge of the bed, and she finally cried, not with despair, but with the specific release that comes when you have been holding something enormous for 5 days and have finally found a place solid enough to set it down. Benin climbed out of his carrier, sniffed the bowl, looked at her with measured assessment and began eating. In the days that followed, Ada worked. She worked the way she always worked, methodically, persistently, without drama. She went to the consulate. She filed the documents. She called the bank. She followed up on the emergency assistance. She contacted a lawyer through the housing authority who was helping her build a case against the building management company. She updated her employer on her status. She kept her project running, not because she was obligated to, but because the project mattered and because staying useful was one of the things that kept her steady. Marco was mostly absent. She heard him sometimes. Footsteps overhead in the early morning, the low sound of a phone call late at night. Occasionally he left things at her door without knocking. A good olive oil once, from what appeared to be somewhere in Umbria. A thick envelope with the contact information for a property lawyer he knew. A small handwritten note that said only, "The cat has been visiting my balcony. I don't mind." She found this last one both alarming and, against her will, slightly amusing. She had not known Benin could access the upper balcony. She later discovered a drainpipe configuration that made the whole enterprise logical. It was on the 11th day that everything shifted. She was working at the small table near the studio window when her phone rang, an unknown number. She answered. It was a man who identified himself as a journalist, working on a story about building code violations in the Navigli district. He had received her name from the Housing Authority complaint database, which was public record. He was working on an investigation into a specific property management company, Rossi Gestioni, and wanted to know if she would be willing to share her experience. She said she would call him back. She sat with the name. Rossi Gestioni. She had written it on her list in the shelter. She had written it on every form. She had cursed it silently every time she had been directed to their legal department and found a new layer of unresponsive infrastructure waiting for her. She searched the name, and then she searched it more carefully, and then she found an article from 8 months ago, a short paragraph buried in a regional business section about a consortium of investors who had acquired a portfolio of residential properties in the city. One of the names in the consortium was a holding company called Ferretti Sviluppo SRL. She read it 3 times. She sat very still. She thought about what this meant, or rather, she thought about what it might mean. Because the distance between a holding company and a consortium and a man who gave her a bowl for her cat was not automatically a straight line, and Ada was not a woman who drew straight lines without evidence. But she was also not a woman who pretended she had not seen something she had seen. She went upstairs. She knocked. He opened the door in what appeared to be the middle of a work session, reading glasses on, a tablet in his hand, a look of mild surprise. He stepped back to let her in without being asked. His apartment was what she would have expected if she had thought about it. Spare, ordered, serious. Books, a large work table near the windows, art on the walls that was good without being decorative, a kitchen that showed the evidence of actual cooking. She told him what she had found. She showed him the article on her phone. She was direct and she was calm, and she did not let her voice do anything she had not decided it should do. He took the phone. He read the article. He set it on the table between them. He said, "Yes, Ferretti Sviluppo is mine." Or was, "It's in the process of being dissolved. I sold my stake in the consortium 14 months ago, but the business filings take time to reflect that." He said it without flinching, without the kind of careful softness that people use when they are managing you. She said, "Did you know about the electrical panel reports?" He said no, but not knowing is not the same as not being responsible. I was a part of that consortium for nearly 3 years. Whatever the consortium authorized or failed to authorize during that time. He stopped. He took off his glasses. I had a meeting with the other investors 11 months ago where I raised concerns about the maintenance protocols across several properties. I was told that the portfolio was performing well and that I was free to exit if I was uncomfortable. I exited. I have thought about that meeting many times since. She said, "And then I called you." He said, "Yes." She said, "And you opened your door?" He said, "Yes." She said, "I need you to understand something. I am not telling you this because I want something from you beyond what we already agreed. I am telling you because I needed you to know that I know, and I needed to see how you would respond to that." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That is a reasonable thing to need." She said, "I am going to speak to the journalist. I am going to share my experience. That is my right, and I intend to use it. I wanted to tell you that directly." He said, "You should. I would like to help, if you will allow it, not to manage the situation, but because I know things about that consortium that you don't, and because I think the truth of what happened in that building deserves to be on record." She looked at him carefully. She was a woman who had spent 9 years reading contracts and people with equal precision. She was good at knowing when something was performance and when it was actual. This was actual. She said, "Then you can speak to the journalist too, separately on your own terms. But I am not going to let you make this story about your conscience. It is about the people who lost their homes." He said, "Understood. I agree." She went back downstairs. She called the journalist. She talked for a long time. Over the following 3 weeks, the story grew. The journalist published his piece. A second outlet picked it up. The housing authority opened a formal investigation into Rossi Gestioni. 3 other former tenants came forward. Ada's legal case strengthened considerably, and the lawyer told her that the odds of a substantial settlement had improved significantly. Marco gave a statement. It was measured and without self-pity, and it named specific decisions and meetings and dates with the kind of precision that only comes from someone who had been carrying the weight of that knowledge for a long time. It did not exonerate him. It was not designed to. It was the kind of truth that accepts its own complications. Her documents were processed. Her savings were released. Her bank restored full access to her account. She began looking at apartments. She stayed in the studio for another 2 weeks while she finalized the lease on a new place. A bright apartment near Porta Romana, with good light and enough room for a proper bookshelf and a balcony where she could, once again, grow herbs in clay pots. On her last day in the studio, she knocked on Marco's door again. She had brought a bottle of wine, something appropriate and unpretentious, and a clay pot with a small basil plant in it, because she had seen that his kitchen window faced south, and south windows were where Basil wanted to be. He accepted both without making a ceremony of it. She said, "I want to be clear about something. You didn't save me. I want you to know I understand that." He said, "I know you saved yourself, I just—" He seemed to search for the word. She said, "Opened a door." He said, "Yes, that is all I did." She said, "It was not nothing." He said, "No, it was not nothing." Benin, who had followed her upstairs one final time, walked past both of them and sat in the center of Marco's kitchen floor and looked at them with the serene judgment of a creature who finds human sentiment both unnecessary and mildly interesting. Ada laughed. It was the first time she had laughed in 31 days. She picked up Benin. She said goodbye. She walked down the stairs and out into the afternoon light of the Brera district, with everything she owned in 2 bags and a cat carrier and a savings account and a new lease and a legal case that was moving in the right direction. She did not look back. Not because the experience meant nothing, but because she had learned in those 31 days something that all the years of careful building had not quite taught her, that who you are is not located in what you own. It is located in how you move through the moment when all of that disappears, in what you write on the form, in who you call and what you say, and what you refuse to pretend you didn't see. She had lost everything in one night. She had not lost herself. And she had found, in the document of that loss, in the architecture of that rebuilding, the clearest version of herself she had ever encountered. Before you leave, if this story moved you, if you recognize something in Ada's way of surviving, her precision, her refusal to become smaller than the disaster, leave a comment below. Tell me what part stayed with you, and if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Every week this channel brings you stories like this one, stories about women who refuse to be defined by what was taken from them. There is one more thing. Months later, Neka called on a Sunday morning, as she always did. And Ada told her the whole story, not the polished version, not the strong version, not the version that makes sense from the outside. The real version. The sidewalk at 2 a.m, the shelter, the 43 euros, the bowl for the cat. Nneka was quiet for a long time, and then she said, in Igbo, something that translates roughly to, "You are not made of what you have. You are made of how you stand." Ada said, "I know, Nene, I know that now." She was sitting on her new balcony when she said it. The basil was already growing. The sun was coming through the south-facing window. Benin was somewhere inside, engaged in something that required his full concentration and none of her involvement. And Ada Okafor, who had lost everything in one night, was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not because the world had been kind, not because someone had rescued her, but because she had moved through the fire and the forms and the fear and the impossible morning and had not once stopped being entirely herself. That is what survival looks like when it belongs to you. That is the whole story.